You aren't born like other children. There are no lullabies, no warm embrace of a mother softly humming in the dim glow of a nursery. Instead, your first breath is a royal event, a spectacle of sacred protocol and trembling reverence. Priests gather in anxious circles, muttering chants and consulting stars. Courtiers bow so deeply their foreheads nearly kiss the marble. Somewhere in the distance, sacred bulls are watched for signs. A twitch of the tail, a low moo, any omen that confirms the gods are pleased. You are not a baby. You are a symbol. A prophecy fulfilled. The living vessel of Horus himself. From the moment you're swaddled, not in cotton, but in linen embroidered with symbols older than the pyramids, your fate is sealed. No messy childhood for you. While other toddlers play in the dirt and chase butterflies, you're surrounded by candlelight, incense, and men in leopard skin sashes whispering that the rising sun is your responsibility. And the sun really does rise for you, or so they say. If it doesn't, if the sky remains dark a few seconds longer than expected, the temple astrologers begin to sweat. A missed sunrise could mean political instability, divine anger, or simply that you, small and squirming, are failing your duty. You are not allowed to fail. There are no toys, only artifacts. No bedtime stories, only hymns chanted in monotone rhythm, each word thick with millennia of obligation. A rattle? No, you're handed a ceremonial scepter too valuable to touch. The idea of crawling on the floor is absurd. Gods don't crawl. Your caretakers don't coo or smile. They assess. They document. They debate whether your gaze is sufficiently godlike. Everything about you is a public matter, your health, your habits, even your hiccups. A cough might signal rebellion. A fever, the end of cosmic balance. They call this your early development. What it really is grooming. You're taught to sit before you can stand. To nod before you can speak. Your babbling is monitored for divine syllables. And when your first coherent words emerge, crafted, rehearsed, blessed, a royal scribe records them in ink and stone. You are not raised to be human. You are raised to be sacred. The idea of family is complicated. Your siblings aren't companions. They are political units with genealogical value. Your cousin might be your future queen. Your aunt might be your next political rival. There is no closeness, only closeness with consequences. The palace is vast, but you can never be alone. Privacy is forbidden. Wandering is dangerous. You are escorted everywhere, not for your safety, but for the nation's. Because if you trip over a cat or sneeze during a ceremony, the divine order may collapse. And that's simply not an option. Your education is relentless. You're introduced to hieroglyphs before your milk teeth fall out, not as art but as law. Your tutors quiz you on sacred geometry and metaphysical balance. You memorize the names of gods, the positions of stars, and the symbolic meaning of each color of linen. You're told how to bless a pomegranate and which direction to face while invoking cosmic harmony. Even at age 6 you understand, one wrong gesture and your kingdom might flood or worse, dry up. At meals you're watched. At rest you're watched. Every gesture must be elegant, every expression must be serene. You learn to smile without meaning it. To bless statues without blinking. To pretend that your golden crib isn't colder than the desert wind. Your friends, if you can call them that, are the children of nobles, priests, and generals. They don't laugh with you. They watch you. They gauge whether you'll be a useful ally or an obstacle to overcome. You quickly learn the difference between a playmate and a political operative. By age 9, you are well versed in the most sacred of illusions, appearing divine while feeling painfully mortal. You understand the game. You don't get to be a child. You get to be a god. And a god, as you're beginning to realize, does not get to rest. The world wakes before you. Not because you're allowed to sleep in, quite the opposite, but because the sacred order of the cosmos demands your presence before the sun dares rise. Your mornings begin in silence, broken only by the chanting of priests and the scrape of sandals on polished stone. You are roused not by affection but by ritual. At your bedside stands a servant holding a scroll, not of fairy tales but of duties. Today's schedule is inscribed in looping glyphs. Lessons in divine protocol, sacred language, geometry for monument building, astronomy for calendar keeping, and a ceremonial lunch where you're not allowed to spill anything. Again, before your feet touch the floor you are purified. Washed with chilled water from a sacred pool, dried with linen blessed 3 times, and anointed with oil extracted under full moons and impossible expectations. Your breakfast is symbolic. Honey and dates arranged in sacred symmetry, to honor fertility, prosperity, and digestion. You may be 10 years old, but the priests have decided the kingdom's stomach depends on yours. Then the learning begins. Hieroglyphs, your first and most terrifying subject. Each symbol is a picture, and each picture carries weight. A bird can be a word. A loaf of bread can be law. And one misplaced curl can accidentally declare war or declare yourself unfit for the throne. You practice writing under the gaze of scribes who hold their breath every time your reed pen touches papyrus. One mistake, and suddenly the temple cats are acting weird and someone has to burn incense over a crocodile statue. Then comes religion, a course where mistakes aren't just wrong, they're blasphemy. You're drilled on the names of the gods, their lineages, their moods, their feast days. You must learn how many times to bow in front of a statue and which way to tilt your head when invoking blessings. Tilt too far left? That's chaos. Blink during an offering? Cosmic imbalance. The high priest watches with a look that says, one sneeze and we're all doomed. After that, mathematics, not for trade but for immortality. You must learn how to design tunes that will last until the stars themselves die. Geometry becomes a sacred act. Angles must be divine. Symmetry is salvation. You are expected to calculate the slope of a pyramid while standing in sandals and trying not to cry. Then there's public speaking. You must learn to project authority even if your voice cracks. Your words are not opinions, they are proclamations, eternal commands. If you say the wrong thing, the Nile might misbehave. If you stutter, someone might interpret it as a sign that Horus disapproves of irrigation. The lesson plan ends with military theory. Yes, military. You are 10 and you've never thrown a stone in anger. But now you're being taught to organize regiments, chart enemy movements, and identify weak points in fortress walls. Not because you will be a soldier. No, that would be too human, but because your enemies expect a god who commands legions, not one who forgets how many spears a chariot team carries. By the time the sun is high, you've studied more subjects than a modern scholar. But you are not done. There are rituals to perform, prayers to lead, statues to bless, every act rehearsed, every mistake punished with spiritual disapproval and very quiet disappointment. You eat lunch under surveillance. A servant cuts your bread into sacred triangles. The royal food taster samples everything first, but that doesn't mean it's safe. You know better. Poison comes in many forms, especially envy. In the brief moments between duties, you are allowed to rest. But rest is relative. You are not permitted to lie down in public. You cannot yawn in front of the priesthood. Your rest consists of sitting very straight, wearing very heavy jewelry, while pretending not to be terrified of the future. And then there's the watching. Always the watching. Your tutors are not merely teachers. They are informants, carefully noting which subjects bore you, which rituals confuse you, and which courtiers you smile at. Your performance is constantly evaluated. Your emotions dissected. Every gesture is political. Every silence strategic. You're a child being trained to appear as anything but a child. By dusk you are too exhausted to speak. Your arms ache from holding scepters. Your head throbs with symbols. Your eyes are sore from reading scrolls by torchlight. But you are not allowed to collapse. Because you are the son of the sun, the voice of Ra, the chosen of Horus. Because you are not just learning to rule. You are learning how to pretend you were born to do it. In most lives, childhood is a sanctuary, a brief, chaotic stretch of scraped knees, muddy games, and giggling secrets whispered under blankets. But not yours. Your palace is grand, yes. All marble courtyards, carved colonnades, and echoing halls that smell like cedar and immortality, but it is not safe. It is not soft. And it is never, ever innocent. Because while other children play, you calculate. From the moment you're old enough to recognize a face, you're taught to see names instead. Bloodlines. Allegiances. Risks. That boy racing past the lotus pool? He's the son of the general who controls the southern forts. He wins at board games a little too often for it to be coincidence. The girl you find yourself smiling at during the morning offering? She's already betrothed, to your cousin, in a union designed to secure 2 provinces and avoid civil war. These are not your friends. They are futures. Potential allies. Potential threats. You are surrounded by children, yes. But they've been briefed. Groomed. They were told how to act around you, what to say, what not to say. They smile too wide, bow too low, laugh at things that aren't funny. It's all very polite. And utterly hollow. Because when you're a god in training, friendship is not encouraged. It's scrutinized. If you favor one child over another, scrolls are written. If you play with someone twice in the same week, rumors begin to ripple through the court like sand in the wind. Parents whisper. Priests frown. Courtiers reposition themselves accordingly. You cannot afford favorites. You cannot afford genuine affection. So you learn the rules of survival. Laugh but never sincerely. Complement everyone's tunic equally. Never stand too close to anyone unless instructed by a ritual. Because one misplaced smile could lead to a marriage negotiation. One whispered joke could be interpreted as a power alliance. You begin to understand that even your emotions are not really yours. They belong to the throne. And what's worse, you're watched. Always. By tutors. By advisors. By servants who don't speak unless addressed, but somehow know more about you than your own reflection. They report your every sigh, every question, every moment of hesitation. If you ask too many questions about the gods, are they real? Do they watch us? Why are they so silent? It's noted. If you hesitate during a prayer, it's whispered that Horus may have grown impatient. Even solitude is suspect. You cannot simply walk through a garden and enjoy the shade of a palm. If you disappear for 10 minutes, a search is launched. Guards are summoned. The palace is quietly locked down. Because gods do not wander. Not without permission. And when, by chance, you do enjoy someone's company, when you begin to feel that tiny flicker of closeness, someone always ruins it. Best be careful, they say. He is fourth in line. She has the queen's ear. Her uncle commands the palace guards. The message is clear. Every bond is a potential noose. So you adapt. You become quiet, watchful, pleasant but unreadable. You learn to compliment someone while internally assessing how much of a threat their family poses to your reign. You memorize the art of bland flattery, of speaking for minutes without revealing a single opinion. You master what the priests call balance, but what you know is really disguise. And the loneliness? It's not just a consequence. It's a requirement. You are raised not to trust, but to endure. Because one day these same boys and girls, who once offered you figs and half-hearted smiles, will be the very ones offering you poisoned wine or writing to foreign kings behind your back. They will rise in court, in influence, in ambition. And when that day comes, when you stand on a golden balcony and wave to the crowd below, you'll know exactly how many of them are smiling with you, and how many are already sharpening their knives. By the time your voice begins to change and the down of adolescence dusts your face like the first shadow of a beard, there is no longer any question of who, or rather what, you are. You are the Pharaoh, the living Horus, the earthly manifestation of celestial will, wrapped in linen and hierarchy and expectation. You no longer play at rulership in the palace gardens under the half-watchful eyes of advisors pretending to let you lead a mock procession. Now you lead real ones, surrounded by stone-faced generals, calculating priests, and servants who bow so low you cannot see their eyes. You have been trained to move like a god, speak like a god, and most crucially, to never show anything resembling uncertainty, because the divine, by definition, does not doubt. And yet, beneath the layers of formality and incense, beneath the ceremonial gold and the braided wigs scented with lotus oil, beneath the titles and the lineage and the scripturally mandated posture of stoic perfection, you are still, inescapably, a person. A person with mortal limitations and private thoughts, who wakes some mornings with a sore back from sleeping too stiffly in a bed carved for spectacle, not comfort. Who struggles to remember the exact number of ceremonial hand motions required for the daily solar renewal rite. Who sometimes feels in the quiet chambers of the mind no priest may enter, that the entire kingdom is balanced precariously on your shoulders and that you were never asked whether you wanted to bear it. Because that's the cruelest irony of divinity in this kingdom. It is assigned, not earned. You were declared sacred before you could pronounce your own name. Your flesh is thought to be holy, but your choices are not your own. You are revered as an incarnation of eternity, yet you are constantly reminded, by pain, by hunger, by exhaustion, that you are finite, fallible, and deeply human. Your body betrays this more than anything. You get fevers. You catch colds. You've had moments of clumsiness that nearly caused a public scandal. Once, during a private ceremony meant only for the inner temple circle, you tripped while ascending the steps to the altar, and 3 priests fainted from shock while another began muttering about inauspicious omens. You were 13. You didn't bleed, but it didn't matter. The symbol of godhood had wavered for a moment, and the entire temple responded as if Ra himself had blinked. Worse still are the moments of private discomfort that the court insists on interpreting as divine messages. A mild headache becomes a possible signal that the gods are displeased with the offering arrangements. An offhand comment at a banquet is picked apart by astrologers who believe it could portend rebellion, drought, or divine reconsideration of your worthiness. If you sleep poorly, the dreams you forget are interpreted by others, scribed in permanent ink as prophecy, and possibly used to justify policy changes or new construction projects. There is no such thing as a bad day. A bad day is a national event. And the rituals, gods, the endless rituals. They consume your days like desert sand swallows water. Each gesture has meaning. Each intonation must be precise. The simple act of lifting a goblet in the presence of a statue requires rehearsed choreography and a chorus of chanting priests, as if one wrong twitch of the wrist might cause the Nile to reverse course. You are surrounded by incense, by sacred scripts longer than rivers, by gilded altars and polished obsidian mirrors that reflect not who you are, but what you must appear to be. To admit fatigue would be sacrilege. To question the need for another ceremony honoring the celestial lotus bloom of Nephthys would be interpreted as arrogance, if not outright heresy. There is no room for why in your vocabulary. Only yes, of course, and it shall be done. Sometimes, when the ceremonies end and the last priest has bowed himself backward out of the room, you sit on the edge of a chair that is too ornate to lean against and think, just briefly, about what it might feel like to walk barefoot down to the river alone, to breathe air that doesn't smell like temple oil, to speak freely not as a god, not as a ruler, but as someone who simply exists. But you do not dwell on this. You cannot. Because the moment your mind wanders from its sacred tether, the machinery of your image begins to wobble. The priests sense it. The court whispers. Your enemies, cloaked in ceremony and familial obligation, sharpen their intentions like knives hidden behind platitudes. You are taught from the earliest age that you are the axis around which the universe turns. But no one tells you what to do when the axis begins to crack. And so, like the thousands of golden statues molded in your likeness and arranged in shrines across the land, you stand, still, polished, exalted, but ultimately hollowed by the impossibility of being what everyone insists you must be, flawless, eternal, and untouchably divine. Every moment of your existence is part of a pageant, a grand, ancient performance rehearsed long before you were born and destined to outlast your reign, your name, and perhaps even the stones that bear your image. To be Pharaoh is not simply to rule, it is to act with absolute conviction in a role no mortal was designed to play. And if the lines are unclear or the stage overwhelming, that is irrelevant. You must perform precisely and unerringly because the fate of the cosmos, or at least the illusion of its order, depends upon your ability to pretend you are not pretending. Mornings do not begin with quiet reflection or idle luxury. They begin with protocol. You are roused before the horizon even begins to hint at gold, your eyes still heavy with fatigue from the prior day's ceremonies, which often dragged into hours of incense-thick air and stiff ritual posturing. The first thing you feel every single day is the pressure of legacy, not metaphorically but literally, as a servant tightens the straps of a chest plate that bears the falcon-shaped symbol of Horus and digs unforgivingly into your collarbone. There is no such thing as casual dress. Your garments are woven with intention, layered with significance, and uncomfortably rigid. The linen, meticulously folded and ritualistically purified, clings to you with ceremonial weight. Sashes embroidered with cosmological metaphors drape from your shoulders. Golden amulets, depicting gods you have been reciting hymns to since infancy, dangle from your neck like burdens. The sandals strapped to your feet are not built for comfort or practicality, they are symbols of divine footing, meant to suggest that wherever you step, sanctity follows. You are dressed not to function but to symbolize. And once you are adorned, the procession begins, not in the public square, not yet, but within the temple walls. The inner sanctum is your true audience and the priest your chorus. They swarm like sacred shadows, their movements choreographed by centuries of inherited instruction, their chants synchronizing with your every step, as though the gods might be watching from just behind the papyrus pillars. You are not allowed to walk casually. Your gait must match prescribed divine cadence, the slow, deliberate pace of eternity. You step into the temple. Immediately, the atmosphere thickens with gravity, not spiritual but political. Every priest present has memorized your flaws, your habits, your tells. Their job is to monitor not only the rituals but you, to note any tremor in your voice, any hesitation in your hand gestures, any frown that might suggest doubt. Because while they serve under you in theory, their real allegiance lies with the temple structure that has outlasted dynasties, coups, floods, and plagues. You may be divine but they are eternal. And so the rites unfold. The scroll is unrolled, absurdly long, elaborately inked, detailing gestures and phrases that must be executed without deviation. You raise the scepter exactly 33 degrees, rotate your wrist toward the statue of Ptah, murmur a phrase that invokes eternal harmony, and hope to the gods, or at least to the scribes, that your pronunciation does not imply drought. You do this for hours. You wave incense that makes your eyes sting. You nod and bow and extend offerings that you must not actually enjoy. You smile serenely even as your knees begin to ache from kneeling before stone figures with blank eyes and impossibly high expectations. You endure hymns sung by voices that blur into noise, their meanings reduced to ritual drone, not because they are meaningless, but because they are so burdened with meaning that your mind, already tired, can't hold them. And then, inevitably, your mind begins to drift. You imagine, just for a second, what it would be like to run. To take off the gold, the feathers, the snakeskin crown, to sprint barefoot across the dunes until the wind becomes louder than the priests and the only voice in your head is your own. But the second the thought emerges, guilt clamps down like a trap. Not because you fear divine punishment, but because someone is always watching, always listening, always ready to interpret your exhaustion as heresy. There are no shortcuts, no improv, no space for weakness. A misstep could mean disaster, not just metaphorically but politically. If you drop a sacred artifact, it may be read as a sign that the gods have withdrawn their favor. If your voice cracks during a recitation, the astrologers will convene to determine whether Saturn has declared war on your lineage. And all of this, every gesture, every bead of sweat, every ceremonial flick of the wrist, takes place before you have even begun the actual work of ruling. These are just the performances, the maintenance of the illusion, the stagecraft of holiness. You were told long ago that to be Pharaoh was to be blessed. What they neglected to mention is that it's also to be exhausted, surveilled, and choreographed into near submission by expectations so massive, they blot out the sky like sandstorms over Thebes. You do not govern. You maintain the illusion that someone does. They call you beloved by the gods, chosen by Ra, Lord of the Two Lands, but when you walk the polished halls of the palace at dusk, what echoes behind you is not reverence, it is tension. It is calculation. It is fear held in check by formality. You are Pharaoh, yes, but you are also a target. The palace, with all its golden thresholds and sandal-polished courtyards, is less a home and more a labyrinth of whispered ambitions. Within its scented walls, under murals of cosmic harmony and ceiling beams carved with protective glyphs, you are flanked at all times by people who kneel before you with the precise, choreographed obedience of professional actors, each with their own script, each hiding their true lines. Your guards, your servants, your advisors, they all smile. They all bow. They all say the right things. But you've learned, over the years, to hear the pause before the compliment, the way certain courtiers glance not at your eyes, but at your crown, as if measuring the weight of it against their own future plans. And the guards? The men sworn to die for you? You know perfectly well that many of them would just as readily kill for the right amount of gold or priestly approval. Loyalty here is a transaction, not a conviction. Every oath spoken in the presence of sacred incense can be undone by the scent of opportunity. Even the ones closest to you, blood relatives, allies from childhood, half-siblings who shared your tutors and your table, are never fully trustworthy. In a world where dynastic power is concentrated in a narrow pool of noble blood and divine claims, every family gathering is a miniature coup waiting for its moment. Your uncles whisper behind carved doors. Your cousins gather just out of earshot. Your mother's sisters hold private ceremonies under the pretext of fertility blessings, but you know the real prayers being spoken, prayers for succession, for elevation, for removal. One less competitor, one more opportunity. You've stopped attending most private meals. You rotate your attendance unpredictably. You eat only after the food has been tested, not just once, but by 3 different testers chosen at random, each sworn to different gods and different factions so that no single poisoner could rely on coordination. You no longer drink wine unless it's from a sealed amphora you personally unstopper. Even then you sip slowly, tasting not for sweetness but for danger. And sleep? That most sacred of human recoveries? Sleep is no longer safety, it is vulnerability. You lie on a bed surrounded by armed guards, behind 3 doors, 2 bronze-banded locks, and a series of rituals meant to confuse any spirit that might seek to do you harm. But the threat isn't from the spirit world. It's from the real one. You sleep with a ceremonial dagger beneath your pillow, not because it would be effective, but because it's the only thing you're allowed to hold after sundown. You've asked for a sword before. The priest said it sent the wrong message. You said nothing, but you haven't asked again. Because asking shows fear, and fear, in your position, is a death sentence disguised as a prophecy. Your days are measured in rituals. Your nights in silence and suspicion. You begin to see signs where none exist. A servant hesitates with your sandals, and you wonder if his family was recently demoted. A concubine's glance lingers too long, and you imagine a scroll being prepared with your name written upside down, signaling betrayal. You never speak of this. You must not. The God King does not entertain paranoia, he provokes it in others. So you wear your face, the one carved in 1,000 statues, serene, stern, ageless. You speak with calm authority, you dismiss rumors with effortless grace, and when someone mentions the concept of treachery you laugh, not too loudly, not too coldly, just enough to remind them that pharaohs are not overthrown. They are remembered as martyrs or monsters. And you know, without question, that the only thing keeping you on the throne is not love, not loyalty, and certainly not divine favor. It is vigilance. Paranoia is not your weakness. It is your armor. You do not trust and therefore you survive. Because pharaohs do not die in bed surrounded by their grandchildren. Pharaohs die at banquets. They die by slow poisons. They die in bathtubs with veiled assassins. They die during eclipses when omens are misread. And when they die no one is shocked. The palace mourns in rehearsed voices, and by the following dawn, another divine child is anointed, swaddled in silk, and told they are the center of the universe. And so you watch, you listen, you endure. Because in the palace of shadows, the only certainty is that someone, somewhere, believes they could wear your crown better. In the public eye you are not simply seen, you are witnessed. Every step, every breath, every flicker of your eyelids is absorbed by 1,000 eyes, studied for signs, interpreted for meaning, and remembered in case the gods need to be reminded of your behavior. The common people don't come to glimpse their sovereign. They come to confirm that the cosmos is still functioning, that Ra still shines, that the floods will come, that Pharaoh still stands tall and unshaken, because if you falter so does reality. Public life is not governed by law but by perception. You do not attend ceremonies. You are the ceremony. You do not speak to your subjects. You bless them with sound. Your voice, however cracked by the heat, must carry the conviction of the heavens. The slightest hesitation, the briefest wince, and rumors spiral like desert wind. Pharaoh looked tired. Pharaoh looked displeased. Pharaoh blinked too often and surely that means Ra is weeping. On the surface your appearances are triumphs. Crowds gather in the blazing sun, crying out praises you're expected to pretend to find humbling. You're hoisted onto a chariot in full regalia, a stiff white tunic soaked through in under 10 minutes, a chest plate of hammered gold that clutches your ribs like a vice, a ceremonial beard glued painfully to your chin with a resin that makes your skin itch beneath the weight of immortality. And the crown, God's the crown. The double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, stacked like an architectural metaphor on your skull. It is not light. It is not elegant. It is a declaration of your burden, your duality, your authority over every grain of sand from Nubia to the Delta. But it is also suffocating, a leather and metal diadem that absorbs heat like stone and rests not on your brow, but on your spine. The heat doesn't care that you're a deity. It punishes you all the same. Your sandals, decorative, impractical, grind into your soles with every step. You walk not because it is practical but because the ritual requires it. You pause not for breath but because the crowd must be given time to gasp and bow and whisper blessings into the dust. You wave with an expression honed over years of practice, half serene, half unknowable. Any less seems disinterested. Any more is inappropriate exuberance. And through it all you sweat. You sweat beneath layers of symbolism. You sweat while blessing livestock that has no idea what your hand means. You sweat while dancers perform before you, while musicians pluck lyres in your name, while nobles present you with gifts they've likely skimmed from state coffers, all the while smiling like they've just offered you eternity on a platter. You do not yawn. You do not stumble. You do not appear bored, distracted, or, worst of all, human. Because in the minds of your people, you are not permitted discomfort. You are not expected to feel the sun. You are the sun. If your expression sours, it's not fatigue, it is divine displeasure. If your voice strains, it's not because you've been chanting for 6 hours, it's because the gods have decided to test their people. You cannot even sneeze without a goat being sacrificed on your behalf. And yet you endure. Because failure in public is not failure in appearance, it is a cosmic crisis. It is a crack in the illusion of order. If you falter, the winds change. If you seem uncertain, harvests fail. You miss a ritual by an hour and someone's grandmother is already claiming she saw a crocodile swimming backward in the Nile. There is no forgiveness for imperfection. Only interpretations. Even the festivals, which outsiders imagine as joyful explosions of color and celebration, are merely extensions of your performance. Feasts where you cannot eat. Dances where you must not move. Plays in which you appear as yourself but never speak, because the idea of Pharaoh must remain pure, unsullied by spontaneity or personal preference. At the end of each appearance, you are paraded back to the palace. your face frozen in divine neutrality, your legs trembling, your ceremonial headdress pressing into your scalp like a punishment for existing. You are escorted by guards who appear reverent, and followed by nobles who are already discussing how best to reinterpret your mood. You return not victorious but drained, a figure worshipped in daylight and hallowed by dusk. And as you pass through the threshold of your private chambers, where no one sees, no one bows, and no one interprets, the mask slips just a fraction. You exhale not with relief but with restraint, because the performance never really ends. You may retreat from the sun, but the weight of the crown, both real and symbolic, presses into you, long after the incense has burned away and the applause has faded into the stone corridors behind you. On the stone walls of your temples, your image is always larger than life, towering over enemies, arms outstretched in divine judgment, the gods themselves leaning in to whisper secrets into your ear. These murals lie with authority. They depict a world in which Pharaoh is the axis, the unmoving center of cosmic power. But within the temples themselves, behind the columns veined with gold leaf and beneath the vaulting ceilings heavy with incense smoke, the truth is more nuanced. You are not alone in this kingdom. You are not even the most powerful figure in it. Not really. The priests smile as they bow to you, but they do not kneel. They chant your praises, but always within the boundaries of Scripture, boundaries they wrote. They hold the scrolls, the relics, the keys to the inner sanctums. They dictate the rituals, interpret the omens, and command armies of scribes, acolytes, and temple workers whose reach stretches far beyond your court. And while you wear the crown, they control the narrative of what that crown means. Because religion in Egypt is not simply a matter of faith. It is infrastructure. The temples are more than places of worship. They are cities within cities, vast, self-sustaining organisms that operate on grain, incense, and silence. Each one is a fortress of soft power, part school, part bank, part agricultural center, and part propaganda machine. The priests who run them are administrators, yes, but also economists, astronomers, engineers, and, most importantly, public opinion sculptors. They are the ones who decide if Ra is pleased or if you, despite all your rituals, might be slipping from favor. And this is their great trick. They revere you in public but define you in private. Without the temple apparatus, your divinity would be nothing more than an untested claim. The rituals they design confirm your sanctity. The festivals they sponsor proclaim your cosmic role. The scrolls they copy, over and over again, ensure that your name is etched into eternity. And yet, should you ever challenge them or question the necessity of their ever-expanding privileges, they are more than capable of revising that divinity. A new dream. A new prophecy. A new interpretation of a solar eclipse. And suddenly the gods are speaking again, but not to you. You are divine, but only so long as the priests agree that you are. You begin to see their subtle maneuvers in everything. Grain stores are withheld for purification, but the surplus mysteriously funds temple expansions instead of royal projects. Astronomical observations are shared, partially, leaving your advisors always just behind in the calendar of sacred alignments. The priesthood claims tax immunity, controls land inheritance, and receives offerings larger than your military stipend, all under the pretense of pleasing the gods. And if you ask too many questions, their answer is always the same. This is what Ma'at requires. Surely Pharaoh would not disturb the sacred balance. No one dares speak the truth aloud, but it lingers beneath every interaction. You are the god they dress, but they are the hands that tie the robe. And worst of all, you need them. You cannot exile them, silence them, or even discredit them without unraveling the very system that holds your power in place. The temples employ tens of thousands. They feed the hungry. They bury the dead. They teach the children what to believe. Remove their favor and the country does not revolt. It simply forgets you. They can erase you without lifting a blade. All it takes is a chisel and a quiet order. Your name removed from inscriptions. Your likeness scratched from temple walls. Your legacy unspooled like thread pulled from a tapestry. Without your name you cannot enter the afterlife. Without your name your monuments are simply stone. And so you learn to navigate this sacred web. You flatter the high priest. You approve temple expansions you cannot afford. You participate in ceremonies you no longer believe in. You nod solemnly when they present you with interpretations of your own dreams. You play the role of divinity because the priests are your audience, and without their applause the entire kingdom turns quiet. You wear the crown. They hold the scroll. And in a kingdom where gods are defined by ritual, the scroll always wins. In any ordinary family, tension might arise over inheritance, favoritism, or dinner table slights. But in your family, the royal house of the Nile, where titles are inherited like divine chromosomes and political ambition runs hotter than desert wind, tension isn't awkward. It's lethal. You are not surrounded by relatives. You are surrounded by rivals with matching eyes. It begins early, quietly, with subtle glances between your mother and her sisters during formal rituals, with the way one uncle always seems to arrive just a moment too late for ceremonial blessings. Never early, never eager, always watching. Your siblings are not companions. They are possible successors, pieces in a celestial game where the board is lined with lineage and the rules are enforced by daggers and dreams. There is no clarity to succession in Egypt. No birthright immune from interpretation. No divine law that cannot be countered by a well-timed vision from a high priest or a newly discovered prophecy unearthed conveniently during temple renovations. Power is never transferred cleanly. It is stolen, negotiated, inherited through manipulation, or seized in the chaos of mourning. Your half-brother? He may smile beside you in processions, but he is also cultivating alliances with the scribes, with the military commanders, with the servants who pour your wine. Your cousin, the charming one with the elaborate earrings and the ever-growing list of noble dinner invitations, recently began referring to himself as of the blood of Horus in official correspondence. And your mother, once your most ardent guardian, now begins most conversations with the phrase, "when the time comes." And then there are the queens, not one but many as tradition demands. Your wives live within the palace complex, partitioned like city-states, each ruling their own web of servants, advisors and spies. Their sons, your sons, are raised as pharaohs in miniature. Each one taught the rituals, the history, the posture. Not because you asked it but because they must be ready. Ready in case something unforeseen happens. In case the gods suddenly decide they've changed their mind about who should rule. You dine with your heirs, and you evaluate their gestures the way generals inspect battlements. Which one is most charming? Which one recites the sacred texts with the fewest stumbles? Which one can look into a crowd and be seen, not as a boy but as a symbol? And you wonder, which one will betray me first? In Egypt, love is a political liability. Affection for one son over another invites sabotage. A kind word spoken too publicly becomes a prophecy. You begin to distribute your praise like rainfall over a dry field, evenly, impersonally, cautiously. You hug less. You say less. You ensure every child feels equally uncertain, equally hopeful, equally expendable. Because your love is not yours to give freely. It is currency. And when family dies, which they do with suspicious frequency, the mourning is rarely pure. A cousin dies suddenly from a desert fever, and 3 noble families send gifts the next morning as if celebrating a cleared path. A young niece slips from a temple balcony during a ceremony, and no one asks why she was unsupervised. You attend funerals flanked by guards, dressed in ceremonial linen, eyes dry not from strength but from necessity. Grief is dangerous when your tears might be interpreted as guilt. Your own tomb is being constructed, piece by piece, by artisans who carve your name into eternity while the living try to erase it before your heart even stops beating. You commission statues of yourself as Osiris, the eternal ruler of the dead, knowing full well that a future heir may choose to bury them or chisel your name from their base. You smile through palace banquets knowing someone at the table has already imagined the location of your sarcophagus. And yet, you maintain the illusion of order. You welcome your sons with paternal dignity. You bless your wives with words pulled from sacred texts. You walk through halls thick with incense and deception, reminding yourself that family is not safety, it is proximity to the blade. In this palace no one is truly loyal. Only loyal for now. Because the closer someone is to your blood, the more intimate their ambitions. And when the time finally comes, when your heart begins to fail or your breath begins to slow, you will not die surrounded by peace. You will die surrounded by contenders, each already preparing to weep for you publicly, while quietly counting the guards, the scrolls, and the priests in their favor. In life you were Pharaoh. In death you are a stepping stone. You were born as a divine event, and now you will die as a national operation. There is no such thing as a quiet death for Pharaoh. You do not pass gently into the dark, wrapped in linen and memory like a favored elder. You do not expire in the stillness of solitude, holding the hand of someone you love. You die as you lived, under observation, under ceremony, under the crushing obligation of spectacle. And when your heart finally falters, whether from poison, exhaustion, or the slow rot of years carrying the weight of eternity on your shoulders, you do not become a body. You become logistics. Because in Egypt, a pharaoh's death is not the end. It is merely the beginning of a highly complex, state-sponsored transformation into eternity. The very moment you draw your final breath, the machinery that has surrounded you your entire life kicks into its most efficient and ruthless gear. Priests are summoned. The embalming chambers, long sealed and incense swept in anticipation of this inevitability, are thrown open. There is no mourning, not yet. There is only procedure. The body is taken under guard, not as a sign of reverence, but because the stakes are too high for error. Your corpse is sacred, and sacred things must be managed. Any delay, any misstep could offend the gods, could signal imbalance, could risk losing your soul forever. First they cleanse you, but not like they do mortals. You are washed in water drawn from sacred pools blessed by spells older than the pyramids. The water is chilled, coppery from the stone, and smells faintly of lilies and formaldehyde. The priests chant over every splash. Every drop that touches your skin is collected and poured over statues as an offering. Even in death you are useful. Then comes the most intimate and horrifying phase, the evisceration. The embalmers, trained not just in medicine but in theology, work in silence. Your internal organs, heart, lungs, intestines, liver, are removed and placed in canopic jars shaped like protective gods. They call this preservation, but it is more than that. It is symbolic filtration. The body must be cleaned of its mortal vulnerability so that the soul may be allowed to sail cleanly into the afterlife. Your brain is removed with a hooked tool, pulled through the nasal passages with slow precision. Not because it is considered unimportant, but because tradition dictates it. The mind, in Egyptian metaphysics, is not where memory lives. That task belongs to the heart. The brain is excess, matter to be discarded, a grotesque relic of human imperfection. Then the drying begins. Your empty body is packed with natron salts and resin-soaked linens, a process designed to strip moisture, decay, and any trace of the mortal from your divine form. 4 weeks, you will lie in an alcove flanked by statues of Anubis and Thoth, while robed priests pace around your desiccating form whispering spells from the Book of the Dead, some protective, others instructional, many simply poetic phrases meant to ward off the dozens of perils waiting beyond the veil. But the true theater of death is not the embalming chamber. It is the tomb. You spent decades building it, not just physically but conceptually. A tomb in Egypt is not a grave. It is a cosmic interface, a royal command center for the afterlife. An immortal stage where the performance of your greatness is to continue, uninterrupted, for all eternity. The architects designed it with mazes and traps, not to test intruders but to confuse evil spirits. Your name is carved into every surface in hieroglyphs so precise they might be mistaken for spells, and in fact often are. The walls are painted with scenes of triumph, worship, judgment, and rebirth, because even the art of your tomb must teach the gods what to expect from you. In this world, presentation is power. When your embalming is complete, your body is wrapped in more linen than most peasants will see in a lifetime, not all at once but in layers, each one anointed, each one inscribed, each layer heavier than the last. Your face is fitted with a mask, gold of course, inlaid with lapis and turquoise, eyebrows arched in serene omniscience. The mask is not for beauty. It is armor. A face for the gods to recognize. And then come the coffins. Plural. You are not laid in one. You are laid in several, like a nested doll of the divine. The inner coffin is carved from sycamore wood and covered in spells. The next is stone, heavier, unmovable, inscribed with prayers for protection against betrayal, lies, and worms. The outermost sarcophagus, sometimes several tons of granite, is shaped like a god's embrace. You are sealed inside with the final prayer, spoken by the high priest of Ptah himself, a man you never trusted in life, but whose voice now determines the tone of your journey into the stars. And still you're not done. Because a pharaoh does not go into the afterlife alone. The tomb must be furnished, and not symbolically. Everything is brought: jewelry, weapons, carved furniture, oil lamps, makeup, papyrus scrolls, fine linens, food wrapped in wax, honey pots, even full beds disassembled and stacked against the walls. It is all placed with obsessive precision by silent workers under the watchful gaze of priests and architects, each item logged in a record no one will ever read, because you must not only be remembered, you must be supplied. There are also the bodies. Servants, concubines, guards, some volunteers, most not, are led into the tomb to die beside you. Not out of cruelty, out of custom. Their presence ensures loyalty in the afterlife. Their deaths confirm your significance in this one. And then the tomb is sealed. Sealed not with sorrow but with ceremony. A massive slab of limestone inscribed with final blessings is lowered into place. The entrance is obscured, the location disguised. Traps are laid. Rumors are spread. Because if you are found, If your tomb is breached, your legacy is not just disturbed, it is unmade. In Egypt, forgetting a name is not an accident. It is spiritual assassination. And so your priests disperse. Your advisors move on. Your family begins plotting again. But your name, your face, your gold-covered corpse remain entombed in silence, waiting for eternity to fulfill its promise. Until someone, centuries or millennia later, dares to break that promise and exposes your sacred rest to the electric glare of modern curiosity. And what will they find? Not a god, not a sovereign, not a myth, a body, dried, wrapped, displayed. A once-living claim to immortality, now catalogued, labeled, stored in climate-controlled conditions and stared at by children on field trips. And in that moment, when the fluorescent lights hum above your burial mask, you are not Pharaoh. You are Exhibit 37B. The statues show you as a warrior. Chiseled muscles, raised spear, 1 foot forward in the pose of eternal conquest. Your chariot thunders into battle while your enemies, always smaller, always uglier, cower and flee. The gods smile down upon you from above. The enemy king kneels, pleading for mercy. Every stone relief insists on this same story: you are unstoppable. But those are scenes, not truths. And what those quiet walls don't show is the cost of that image. Because being Pharaoh means more than leading from afar. It means donning armor and stepping onto the battlefield yourself. Not as a commander cloaked in tactical distance, but as a divine symbol, living and vulnerable, expected to perform like a celestial weapon no matter the terrain, the weather, or the odds. You don't get to hide behind generals. That is not your role. The Pharaoh must be seen. Seen gripping the reins of a chariot as it hurtles over uneven ground. Seen wielding a curved khopesh sword, gleaming with both ceremony and actual blood. Seen standing atop the corpse-littered hill while his soldiers chant his name in tones that hover somewhere between loyalty and desperation. And yet, what no one dares to say, not in the temples, not in the barracks, not even in the privacy of your own mind, is that you are often terrified. Because for all the talk of destiny and divine protection, the arrows don't know your name. The spears don't care who carved your cartouche. The battlefield doesn't part like the Nile before you. It closes in, thick with screams and dust and panic and mud that clings to your golden sandals like guilt. When you ride to war, it is not as a man seeking conquest. It is as a figurehead under duress. Your advisors tell you it's necessary, not for strategy but for legitimacy. If the people do not see their god-king strike down foreign enemies with his own hand, how will they believe that Ma'at, the sacred order of the universe, remains unbroken? If you delegate too much, if you merely approve troop movements from the safety of a palace garden, then are you truly Pharaoh? Or are you merely a well-dressed administrator with a dangerous job title? So you go. You lead. And you learn firsthand that war is not glory, it is logistics, terror, and noise. It is days without sleep, nights full of tension, and the ever-present knowledge that your death would not just be a national crisis, it would be a cosmic catastrophe. And yet, even in this, even in the dust and clamor, you must perform. You must wear the war crown, a heavy loop of leather and bronze that digs into your brow while signaling your willingness to kill. You must chant victory prayers before the first arrow is loosed. You must make calculated eye contact with your officers so they see not doubt, not fatigue, but a living incarnation of wrathful divinity. Even when your hands tremble. Even when your stomach churns. Even when your shield is too heavy, and your enemies have brought more men than your scouts estimated, and your horses are skittish and the gods are silent. There are no pauses allowed for strategy. No timeouts for breath. You are expected to channel the chaos around you into a ritual. Every blow you strike becomes an omen. Every enemy you slay is carved later into temple walls with exaggerated ease, as if your arms didn't ache from the weight of your sword, as if your knees didn't buckle when the enemy general died with his blood on your feet. And should you win, which, thanks to your generals and your scribes, you usually do, your return must be carefully orchestrated. You ride into the capital beneath banners proclaiming divine favor. Prisoners walk behind you in chains. Priests toss flower petals. Trumpets sound. You raise your chin, wave to the people, and try not to vomit from dehydration. Later, artists will be summoned to immortalize your victory. They will ask about your pose, your angle, the way the sun hit your armor at the moment of triumph. They will not ask about the men you lost. They will not ask about the dreams. They will not ask how many hours you stared at the battlefield afterward, wondering if this is what eternity actually feels like. One long procession of blood and silence and the obligation to smile through it. Because pharaohs do not suffer trauma. They inspire confidence. And if you lose, which must never be acknowledged no matter how battered your troops or how narrow the escape, The priests find new stories to tell. Perhaps the enemy used black magic. Perhaps the moon was misaligned. Perhaps you were testing your army's resolve. But never ever must the truth be carved in stone. Never must it be written that you hesitated. Never must it be said that the god of Egypt bled. Because you are not allowed to fear death. You are only allowed to defy it. And if you fall in battle, if an arrow finds your throat or a sword catches you in the soft spot beneath your ribs, you will not be mourned like a man. You will be sanctified like a symbol, paraded through memory as the eternal conqueror, even if your body was burned and buried in haste and the war you died in was forgotten by the time your grandson began building his temple. Because in Egypt, pharaohs are not permitted to die with dignity. They die for continuity. And the story moves on. You were told your name would live forever. That it would echo down through time, carved into limestone, painted in ochre on the ceilings of temples, inscribed on golden sarcophagi and repeated in the chants of future priests who would kneel before your statues and breathe your name to the stars. This was the contract you were given from the day of your coronation. Serve Ma'at, maintain order, expand the borders, fund the temples, and in return, you will be remembered. Eternally. But eternity, as it turns out, is negotiable. Because history is not truth. History is a tool. It is a wall constantly repainted by those who inherit your crown, your court, your chaos. And your name, once whispered with reverence, once chiseled with reverent care into sacred surfaces, is only as permanent as the ambitions of your successor allow. You die believing the tomb is sealed. The priests have performed the final rites. Your legacy is secured. The monuments were funded, the statues raised. The inscriptions were made in full compliance with celestial geometry. You built your future not on faith but on infrastructure. You trusted the weight of stone to carry your memory. But all it takes is a hammer. A jealous heir. A politically inconvenient reign. A priest with a new prophecy. A shift in power. And suddenly the very stonemasons who once knelt before your likeness are called upon to erase it. Not entirely, of course, at first, just a small section. A name scraped off a statue base. A cartouche defaced on a temple wall. An offering table moved, reinscribed with a different lineage. A subtle reordering of dynasties and temple scrolls, justified by new celestial readings. And just like that, you are someone else's prelude. Your wars become footnotes. Your temples become someone else's gift to the gods. Your image, once adorned in sacred paint, now wears the chisels of official disapproval. The stories change. The divine omens that once marked your rise are now reinterpreted as warnings. Your victories were exaggerated. Your taxes were too harsh. Your devotion to the gods insufficient by new standards. In court, no one speaks of you directly anymore. Your name is spoken cautiously as though it might conjure a ghost. The older priests frown but say nothing. They have seen this before. They know how fragile eternity is. Because pharaohs don't just fear death. They fear erasure. And this is the most terrifying truth no one dares to tell the living God while he's still alive. That the tomb you spent your life designing might not be a monument but a target. Even sealed and buried beneath tons of sand and stone, your grave is vulnerable, not just to grave robbers but to the slow, merciless grind of irrelevance. Successors reallocate your resources, raid your treasury under the justification of divine redistribution, or worse, they mine your memory for their own political gain. They place their names on your statues. They move your body. They rewrite you. And centuries later, when archaeologists crack open the tomb you believed would remain untouched for all time, they do not find a god. They find a mystery. They find a name that appears in one scroll but not another. They find evidence that your cartouches were scratched out and rewritten. They argue over which reign was yours, over whether your death was natural or staged, over whether the unfinished monument on the western cliffs belonged to you or someone else entirely. Some claim your pyramid was a repurposed project. Others suggest your entire reign was retroactively fabricated by your grandson to justify a temple tax. Meanwhile, tourists shuffle past your display case in a museum 6,000 miles away, peering through glass at the shrunken remains of your divinity. They whisper about curses, about death masks, about that famous pharaoh whose name I can't pronounce. They take photos. They laugh. They move on. And there it is, your name. Misspelled on a placard. Trapped between a gift shop and an exhibit on Roman plumbing. You ruled the greatest kingdom on earth. You commanded armies. You outlived your rivals. You endured ceremony, paranoia, war, and the slow erosion of self under a crown so heavy it bent your spine. And now you are catalogued, numbered, archived, stored under optimal humidity levels. You died believing you would become myth. Instead you became metadata. And the empire, your empire, still turns, still floods, still worships. But not you. Not anymore. You were promised divinity, not in spirit but in permanence. You were told that the rituals would preserve you, that the tomb would protect you, that the monuments would outlast sandstorms, invaders, earthquakes, and the inevitable rise and fall of dynasties. You were told that a pharaoh could not die in the ordinary sense, because Pharaoh was not flesh but function, an eternal office dressed in gold and myth, immune to the mundane decay that swallows lesser men. But now, long after your final breath, you begin to understand what the priests never said aloud, that even gods are only worshipped until they are inconvenient. And that is the ultimate lie at the heart of Egyptian power, that worship was never about reverence. It was about utility. You were sacred not because you were loved but because you were needed. The moment your memory ceased to serve the structures you upheld, the temples, the court, the scribes, the system, it became excess. Legacy, like grain, was to be stored when bountiful and quietly redistributed when it risked upsetting balance. You were a tool, a symbol, a chapter in someone else's myth. And now the curtain has fallen. But the stage is still there. The rituals continue. The chants go on. A new pharaoh has taken your titles, adopted your crown, claimed your divine birthright. The same priests who once declared your incarnation of Horus now whisper that the gods have chosen again, as if sacred destiny were simply a rotating appointment. And the people, weary and dust-covered, bow to the next incarnation with the same mixture of awe and exhaustion they once reserved for you. Because that is what Ma'at demands, continuity, not consistency. Meanwhile, your monuments crumble. Not from violence but from neglect. The soft collapse of memory. Your likeness is still carved into stone, yes, but the paint has faded, the eyes have been scratched out, and the name beneath your image has been chipped away, replaced with a newer script, a newer god-king, a newer story. There is no scandal. No announcement. Just quiet, systematic reassignment of glory. Even your voice has been stolen. The speeches you gave, the decrees you issued, the phrases once sung in your honor, they now belong to others. Recycled into newer scrolls, retrofitted for the current divine narrative. In this world, nothing is sacred but survival, and even the words of a god can be edited if they no longer match the desired tone. And as for your tomb, it remains technically undisturbed. The entrance is still sealed. The inscriptions still proclaim your greatness. But no one visits. No one prays. No festivals are held in your name. The path has been overgrown with sand and silence. What was once the most sacred architectural endeavor of your reign, an axis between earth and the afterlife, is now a forgotten address, waiting to be rediscovered, misinterpreted, and misrepresented centuries later by foreign scholars with clean fingernails and crude translations. They will dig you up one day, of course. They always do. They will marvel at the engineering, the lavishness, the perfectly preserved eye paint on your funerary mask. They will speculate about your reign, argue about your policies, publish articles on your health based on the calcium in your bones. And they will get it wrong. All of it. They will mispronounce your name. They will attribute your tomb to the wrong dynasty. They will interpret your offerings through the lens of modern economies and your rituals as superstition. The story of your life, your decisions, your regrets, your triumphs, your private fears, will be filtered through textbooks, museum plaques, and coffee table documentaries, until it is no longer a story but a display. They will place you beneath glass. Children will press their fingers against it and giggle. Tour guides will invent colorful phrases for your cause of death. And somewhere in the corner, behind your mummified remains and beside a gift shop selling replicas of your mask, a small placard will read, "Unknown Pharaoh, identity contested. You ruled nations. You walked among gods. And in the end you are disputed." That is the final cruelty. Not death. Not even erasure. But corruption by reinterpretation. The stripping of nuance. The flattening of identity. The truth of who you were, smothered beneath layers of ceremony in life, and beneath conjecture, tourism, and convenient misremembering in death. And still Egypt endures. The river flows. The temples crumble and are rebuilt. The throne is renamed. The festivals repurposed. The gods adjusted. And the people, always the people, adapt, bowing not to truth, but to whatever image is most useful this decade. And that is your legacy. Not the preservation of your soul, but the realization that your soul was never yours to preserve. It belonged to the pageantry, to the structure, to the theater of eternity. You were Pharaoh. But only while you served the script. You have worn many names. Titles stacked like bricks: Horus of gold, Lord of the two lands, Son of Ra, Uniters of the crowns, Beloved of Ma'at. Your name was sung by priests, etched into stone, molded into cartouches and sealed into sacred amulets. For decades your identity was not a question but a litany. But now, as the dust settles across centuries, as the walls of your tomb fade and your statue is mislabeled in a foreign museum with harsh lighting and louder children, the one question that remains, the one no ritual could answer, no priest could clarify, no crown could weigh, is this: who were you when no one was watching? Because what they built around you, the gold, the gods, the symbology, was never you. It was armor, narrative, a mask worn not for deception but for expectation. And in time, like all masks worn too long, it began to shape your face. You remember fragments, brief, unguarded moments that slipped through the cracks in your performance. A breath taken alone in a garden courtyard before the procession began. A glance shared with a servant who forgot, just for a second, to avert their eyes. A question whispered into the ceiling beams of your chamber on a sleepless night. Is any of this real or just obedience with choreography? You were not allowed to think aloud. But you did. Quietly. Illicitly. You remember the feeling of being adored by crowds who didn't know you. Of being feared by courtiers who bowed with reverence while hiding knives in their intentions. Of seeing your own face carved again and again in temple walls, each version more idealized, more symmetrical, more divine, until even you could not remember what your actual reflection looked like. You were not permitted to doubt. But you did. Not about the gods, but about your place among them. You wonder now, did you ever believe it? The divinity? The idea that your veins carried more than blood, that your breath was woven from holy air, that your heart would be weighed not against guilt but against cosmic truth? You said the words. You walked the path. You endured the rituals. But belief? That was different. Belief was not something spoken. It was something you had to fight to feel in the long hours between duties, when the incense faded and the voices stopped and you were left with your own thoughts. Unauthorized, unrecorded, and entirely your own. And in those moments you sometimes wondered if the real you, the one without the crown, the posture, the anointing oil, had ever truly been born. Or had he been buried before he could speak? Because from the moment you could walk, you were taught to stand in a certain way. From the moment you could speak, your words were chosen for you. Your smile was calibrated. Your anger ritualized. Even your silence became ceremonial. There was no room for preference, no time for individuality, no oxygen for contradiction. You did not exist. The role did. And now, long after the role has ended, after the stone has cracked and the scrolls have faded, you are left with silence. Not the silence of peace but of aftermath. Of empty space once filled with noise, choreography, reverence, fear. And in that silence, the only thing that remains, not eternal, not divine, not revered, is the small, quiet voice that was never allowed to grow louder than a whisper. The voice that asked, what if I had been just a man? Not a god. Not a symbol. Just a man. A son. A friend. A person with no throne, no crown, no gold, no afterlife. Someone who could laugh without being recorded. Cry without being interpreted. Speak without consequence. Die without ceremony. Would that have been exile? Or freedom? Would that have been less? Or would it have been the first time you truly lived? Because now, as the legacy has dissolved, as your name is misremembered or omitted, as the sacred and the forgotten begin to blur, what matters is not how many temples bore your image or how many wives you took, or which foreign king signed treaties under your seal. What matters is the part of you that never made it into the records. The part of you that wasn't written. Because maybe, just maybe, that unrecorded part, quiet, unceremonial, profoundly human, was the only thing that was ever truly yours. And it is gone. Not because someone took it from you, but because the world never allowed it to exist. There is a point beyond legacy, beyond memory, beyond worship, story, language, beyond even the sedimentary layers of time that pile atop forgotten kings like soft stone. A point where not even the whispers of gods reach, where the echo of your name ceases to reverberate, not because it was silenced, but because there is no longer anyone left to listen. That point is not death. It is not burial. It is after. The tomb remains sealed. The priests are gone. The empire that forged you, bled for you, feared you, betrayed you, it too has turned to ruin. The river still runs but no one chants to it in your name. The temples are shadows of outlines in sand. Cities you ruled are now nothing more than archaeological sites, broken open by curiosity and photographed into academic convenience. And in the quiet your body waits, not with dignity, not with power, but with the inert patience of an object that no longer belongs to the world it once ruled. The linen has darkened. The resins have hardened. The golden mask, once radiant, once worshipped, once kissed by priests trembling in reverence, now rests under artificial light, polished not by acolytes, but by interns in latex gloves. You are lifted not on a palanquin but by forklifts. Your eternal home is now a crate. And no one calls you Pharaoh anymore. They call you specimen. Subject. Individual male, c. 18th dynasty. You are scanned, measured, described, studied, misinterpreted, compared to bones from neighboring tombs. Placed in storage. Removed. Returned. Moved again. You are now data. The gods do not visit you here. There is no field of reeds, no celestial boat to sail, no weighing of the heart beside Anubis. All of that was a story, useful, magnificent, deeply believed. But even belief is perishable. Belief requires breath. And all those who believed in you, around you, because of you, are dust. You are beyond belief, beyond role, beyond name. And yet this is not tragedy. Not exactly. It is simply the final stage of divinity, irrelevance. You were Pharaoh, living God, center of the cosmos. But the cosmos has continued without you. It always would. Your absence caused no collapse, no star to fall. The next ruler took your place, and the next after him. And again, until the very structure that defined your sacred office forgot it ever needed you. You were not the sun. You were a shadow cast briefly by its light. And still, deep in the tomb that once bore only your name, something stirs. Not movement, not life, not soul. But a kind of metaphysical gravity, the faintest residue of what you once were. Not the pharaoh. Not the warrior. Not the divine. But the person underneath it all. The one who, as a child, stared up at the painted ceilings of the palace and wondered if the stars they depicted ever truly matched the sky. The one who walked alone sometimes beneath date palms, not to be seen but to be unseen. The one who, for one moment during a festival, caught his own reflection in a polished bronze plate and thought, I don't know who that is. That voice, that flicker, that core self that was never carved in stone, never named in hymns, never embalmed, still lingers. Not as a soul. Not as a ghost. But as a silence. A question. A breath never taken. And in that stillness, where names dissolve, where kingdoms fade, where even gods grow quiet, something finally happens that never did in life. You are alone. Not watched. Not worshipped. Not feared. Not recorded. And in that aloneness, no crown, no duty, no expectation, you become what you never were allowed to be. Not eternal. Not divine. Not even remembered. Just one thing at last. Free.